We always think of law enforcement officials as the good guys, but sometimes that's just not the case. It helps to think that a psychotic serial killer could be anyone, even someone with a badge that's sworn to protect you. From the notorious police killer who shot himself to an army officer responsible for the deaths of dozens of women, let's have a look at 7 cops who turned out to be serial killers. Christopher Dorner. Christopher Dorner was born on June 4, 1979 in New York. He spent his childhood living in Los Angeles, transferring between multiple schools in the area. After graduating from Southern Utah University in 2001, Dorner joined the Navy Reserve. While Christopher Dorner was in the Navy Reserve, he joined the Los Angeles Police Department in 2005 and completed his training in 2006. A year later, in 2007, Dorner filed a report against his training officer, Teresa Evans, for using excessive force against a mentally ill man, who they arrested. His claims could not be substantiated, and so were dismissed. Dorner was fired from the LAPD in 2008. He appealed his case multiple times, but each court affirmed the decision of the LAPD. On February 3, 2013, Dorner approached Monica Kwan and her fiancé Keith Lawrence, who were sitting in their parked car in an Irvine parking garage, and shot them both to death. Why these two strangers? Well, Monica Kwan's father was Randall Kwan, who was an LAPD captain that had represented Dorner during his hearings. Dorner made a Facebook post that warned Randall Kwan of the consequences against him and his family because of Dorner's firing. The Facebook post made Dorner a prime suspect in the murders. On February 12, 2013, after 9 days on the run, Dorner took a couple hostage in their cabin in Big Bear Lake, California. He then left the residence in a stolen vehicle. The wife managed to get free and alerted the police. After Dorner left the cabin, he ran into a marked police car driven by a game warden and opened fire. During the ensuing shootout, 2 officers were wounded and one of them died. Christopher took refuge in a cabin in the mountains where he continued to fire at the police. The cabin then suddenly burst into flames. Police believe this was caused by smoke bombs they were using to draw Dorner out. Police found his charred remains inside the cabin. The autopsy showed that he had died from a self-inflicted gunshot. The whole thing ended as he surely knew it would. Alone, besieged, a blaze consuming the walls around him. Norbert Poehlke. Also known as the Hammer Killer, Norbert Poehlke was a German police officer who was never brought to justice for his heinous crimes. His first known murder victim was a 47-year-old man named Siegfried Fitzer. Poehlke shot him and took his car. This vehicle was found not far away and connected to a bank robbery that occurred the same day. Poehlke had used what would become his signature weapon, a sledgehammer, to smash the teller's window. The same year, on December 21st, Eugene Weathy, 37, was found dead in a similar fashion to Fitzer. Within a week, his vehicle had been used for a bank robbery getaway car by a man with a sledgehammer. He took one more life, and by October 1985, Poehlke was rightly paranoid that the police were treating him as a suspect. He took some time off work, and a few days later, officers went to his house to ask him questions regarding the bank robberies and associated murders. When they arrived, nobody answered. Poehlke's wife and son were inside. Both had been shot dead, but Poehlke and his remaining son were missing. Later that week, Poehlke's vehicle was found. He had driven some distance from his residence before shooting and taking his son's life, then his own. He took the whole family with him. Zeng Kaigui. Because cash is the most generally accepted form of currency in China, it is normal for people to withdraw huge sums of money from banks. This characteristic was exploited by serial killer Zeng Kaigui, who utilized it to target his victims. He would choose his victims carefully, shoot them, and then steal their money. The craziest part is Zeng was a surveillance expert officer for the People's Liberation Army. His training most likely helped him avoid the police's suspicion. After shooting a guy outside a bank in Nanjing and fleeing with $30,000, he was finally identified in 2012. When police realized Kaigui could be the perpetrator of a string of similar crimes, they dispatched 13,000 officers and 2 helicopters to track him down. Unfortunately, he was never apprehended and is still considered a danger to society. Mikhail Popkov. Mikhail Popkov was a Russian police officer who started his killing spree in 1992 and continued until 2010. Popkov used to roam around the bars and gave a lift to intoxicated women in his Lada 4x4. Once he got them into his car, he used to take them into the woods to sexually assault, torture, and kill them. After doing such a horrendous act, he used to go back home to his family as if he didn't commit such a heinous crime. The women used to belong to an age group of 16 to 40. They would trust him because he was a police officer. Popkov used to mutilate and stab them up to 170 times, leaving the body of the victim extremely wounded, to the point where it looked as if a werewolf had torn open the body. Thus, he came to be called the werewolf. Fortunately, one of his victims survived the attack and later identified Popkov as her attacker. The police first refused to believe her, but his DNA was connected to the crime scene. The tire marks of his Lada 4x4 were also discovered beside most of his victims' bodies. He also had contracted an STD from one of the victims, thus confirming him as the suspect. He was arrested on June 23, 2012, after getting his DNA recorded alongside 3,500 other policemen. He was accused of murdering at least 29 women. After his arrest, he cooperated well and confessed that he wanted to clean the population of immoral women, which is why he started killing. David Stephen Middleton. Born on June 25, 1961 in Boston, Massachusetts, Middleton, by all accounts, fit in well with everyone. A hardworking student at 18 years old, he was soon recruited as a police cadet for the Boston Police Department. David Stephen Middleton took a new career as a cable installer after leaving the Miami Police Department. His new career enabled him to prey on unsuspecting victims who welcomed him into their homes. Middleton didn't appear to be too concerned about hiding his traces. He was immediately a strong suspect when the body of Catherine Elizabeth Powell was discovered bound in a Nevada dumpster in 1995. That's because he had conducted a service call to Powell's home just days before she was murdered. He incriminated himself even more when he used her credit card to buy sound equipment. But it was the fact that Powell's body was covered in a very distinctive yellow trash bag that wasn't sold in many stores that led authorities to Middleton. Police uncovered the garbage bags, stereo equipment, and other incriminating items in a storage locker rented by Middleton after obtaining a warrant for his arrest. Middleton was later found guilty of a second murder after the bones of Thelma DeVilla were discovered in a similar manner to Powell's. Middleton's storage locker included a blanket belonging to DeVilla, as well as hair that was definitely recognized as DeVilla's. Middleton was found guilty of 2 counts of murder and condemned to death after his capture and trial in 1996. While he was in prison, the remains of another person were discovered, and it is suspected that he was the perpetrator of that person's death as well. John Christie. Many know John Christie for horrifying acts of violence against women back in the 40s, but what's not common knowledge is the fact that he was a police constable. Given his criminal record, it's a mystery how Christie became a police officer in the first place. His rap sheet includes a series of thefts and violent acts. Nevertheless, he managed to gain respect in the War Reserve Police, even while perpetrating a series of horrible killings. Ruth Purist, a 21-year-old woman, was Christie's first victim. He choked her and took her life during a sexual encounter one night and then buried her body in his apartment's community garden. His bloodlust seemed to be sparked by this first act as he went after his next-door neighbor, Muriel 80, whom he called over under false pretenses in order to sexually assault and end her life. Christie was able to seduce his victims in part because he pretended to be a doctor. This was why his third victim, Beryl Evans, a neighbor, thought he could help her terminate her pregnancy. Christie promised to assist, but instead sexually abused and strangled Beryl with a necktie before burying her body in the garden shed. Christie would end 4 more lives, including his wife's, and store their bodies in various locations on his property over the next few years. When he was finally arrested and placed on trial for his crimes, the jury sentenced him to death in no less than 2 hours. He was hanged for his crimes on March 9, 1950. Gennady Mikhasevich. At last, we have Gennady Mikhasevich, who was charged with the murder of 36 women, but the actual number could be as high as 60. All of that over an ugly breakup with his girlfriend. Born in 1947, Gennady served in the army. He committed his first murder on May 14, 1971. Gennady that night was feeling desolate because of the breakup and had prepared a loop to hang himself. However, he accidentally met a young woman on the road. He decided to kill her, venting his anger on her. He murdered again in October 1971 and strangled 2 other women in 1972 near Vitebsk. Mikhasevich graduated from a technical school in Vitebsk in 1973 and returned to his village. He married in 1976. In the meantime, the murders went on, many of which included sexual assault and abuse. The investigation started to advance in the 1980s, so in order to derail the police, Gennady sent an anonymous letter to the local newspaper. It was on behalf of an imaginary underground organization, Patriots of Vitebsk, supposedly calling his fellow militants to intensify their struggle of killing communists and lewd women. When he left a similar handwritten note next to his victim, again signed on behalf of Patriots of Vitebsk, the investigators started to ascertain the handwriting of the male residents of the oblast. Having checked 550,000 samples, the experts detected that the sample with the handwriting of Gennady Mikhasevich had a striking resemblance with the handwriting on the murderer's notes. He was finally arrested in 1985, the year in which he took the lives of 12 women. He was sentenced to death by the firing squad. What's crazier is that the Russian police arrested at least 12 suspects for those murders. Some were given life sentences, and others were killed. After watching this video, do you trust police officers? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it and also subscribe to our channel for your regular dose of whodunits. See you in the next one. Until then, stay safe, stay warm, and don't get any crazy ideas.